feel so bad, I'm not going back. Loss of self-consciousness, we get absorbed in the actual characterization. And an altered sense of time is really interesting. People will often think of this in terms of, oh, I sat down to play and I played for like 5 hours. Now that's an altered sense of time, which is interesting, but what's more interesting to me is the altered sense of like, you know, I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and it's like 10 days in the game time. But it's an hour of my time. But the actual phenomenal experience of what's going on, I feel like it's day, night, day, night, day, night. I'm not considering things in my human time scale anymore. I've switched and adjusted to the game time. FIFA is a great example of this. A football game lasts 90 minutes. Now you can play FIFA over 90 minutes, but I don't know anyone who actually engages in that level of sadism. We'll all set it to the 5-minute game time, right? But it feels like a 90-minute game. You still say, like, I scored in the 71st minute. It's like, no, you didn't. You scored in, like, 250 seconds or something like that. You adjust, the whole thing adjusts that. And that altered sense of time becomes the time scale that we actually relate to what goes on in the game. So, a lot of game designers have obviously worked with flow as a concept. So, Genova Chen is the one picking up on here. Chen believes flow theory provides a working model for game designers, encouraging them to keep players in a sweet spot where they have the right amount of ability to meet the challenges at hand. Too little ability can result in anxiety and frustration. Too little challenge can result in boredom or apathy. What's interesting here is those emotions. Anxiety, frustration, negative emotions. Boredom or apathy, negative emotions. Flow results directly, and the sort of extent to which you can design flow in a game results in emotional outcomes. If you get it wrong, people are going to be bored, an emotional response. They're going to feel apathy, an emotional response. Frustration, if it's too hard. Anxiety, if you know, you haven't got the ability to do this. Has anyone ever felt anxiety playing a game?
Yeah.
Yep. What game?
Everything. I'm always anxious.
Okay, this might be more tapping into your personal psychology,
No,
Alice.
yeah.
But yeah.
But yeah, for example, like Minecraft, that thing I was saying about like
Yeah.
zombies, they give you anxiety because they come out of nowhere when you're not really like in the game.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Times.
I think that's absolutely fair. Any others?
Any horror moment in a non-horror game? Like, I remember playing Far Cry 4, and there's one boss that appears in that. And
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. I'm such a wuss when it comes to any kind of horror. I just wanted that to end as quickly as possible.
Would you play a horror game?
No, I don't like being scared. I just can't do it. I literally can't. I play Phasmophobia.
I wish I could go back a few months now and say you have to do like Resident Evil 2 for this task, right? That'd be amazing. What are you gonna say?
I'd say like CS:GO, if you're in a 1 versus 5 situation and it's the last point of the match, the anxiety can be pretty insane in that.
Yeah.
Really? I find it opposite, like in the clubs, you need to be in the clubs, the pressure.
Yeah, the pressure. I find
Yeah, or like the
I
score.
was shaking. Yeah, the score.
Yeah, I
I was
know.
shaking.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, of course, you can have different emotional responses to the same situation because you're different people.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, flow also works at an individual level, and you know, that is acknowledged too. So, why flow becomes interesting in terms of this emotion is because we actually use emotional terms to describe the flow experience. So, when people discuss games they play, much of their vocabulary relates to flow, such as curiosity, excitement, challenge, elation, and triumph. And what's going to be interesting in a couple of weeks' time is when I'm sitting down and marking your work, a lot of you will use terms like this and not realise what you're doing is talking about how you're in a flow state. So for those of you who are paying attention right now, I want you to pick up on that, because that actually indicates those kind of words that you use to describe what's going on are actually really solid indicators of you are experiencing something in what Csikszentmihalyi and others would call a flow state. So, the whole principle of flow theory offers a useful lens for understanding the unique emotional power of games compared to other media. Because we wouldn't say, you know, oh, I'm sitting down to watch the Marvels, right? And I'm feeling excitement, triumph. When I'm, what are you saying? You're watching a film, dude. What triumph are you getting out of it? You know, there's, you know, what is it? Or you're feeling, you know, discouragement. It's like, I think you're getting too into this, but it seems to make perfect sense when we talk about games in that context. Now, how else can we understand emotion in games? Well, an important principle is grounded cognition theory. Grounded cognition theory helps explain what it is about games that changes the range of possible responses. Okay? Because, Kyriakos, when you're playing something, you get an emotional response. If I played the same thing, mine could be very different. That doesn't mean that the game is any different, because obviously it's the same game that we're playing. But we bring different things to the table here. Because of that, flow theory has a limitation then. In that, well, we say, right, we're both playing, okay, good example, Resident Evil 2, right? We're both playing this game. I'm getting a sense of extreme happiness and enjoyment from it. Because I kind of like games like that, right? I like that sense of dread and foreboding about the game, and I like the idea that something's going to come out around the corner, and there's the famous one in Resident Evil 2 is the licker, right? This thing that's on the ceiling and it jumps down and his tongue comes out and slashes you. And people don't like that very much because it's a proper jump scare. I'm into that, but you're not going to feel it the same way here. So grounded cognition theory, basically what we can say is we're both in the same state of flow. What flow theory finds difficult here to say is, okay, so why do we get different emotional responses from the same stimuli? Because we're both in a situation where we're in that sense of engagement, but we're getting something different from it. So what we need to do is perhaps add something on top, and that's usually what we refer to as grounded cognition theory. That helps explain what it is about games that changes the range of emotional experience possible for players when they take on an alternate identity or social situation during play. Basically, the argument from grounded cognition theory is that we take on our interests, our likes, our desires, our wants from our life and embed them in how we play the game and how we identify with the characters in the game and the personas that we're asked to identify with. So, if you like, there are two ways of looking at this. There's, from grounded cognition, it's like who we are as people and how we can inhabit the game itself. And those two things are intimately linked to one another. So, good example of this. Will Wright again, the designer of The Sims, right? Talking about the first time he played Black and White Creature Isle. Anyone heard of this? No? Think Animal Crossing. Very, very similar sort of game to Animal Crossing. Okay? So, in this plane, the player is a creature that he trains who acts as his go-between with the villagers in the game world. So basically you have a little character, you train it up, and then that character interacts with other NPCs in the game, and that's how you have progress in the game. The player can create an evil creature by treating it badly, or create a moral creature by treating it well. So it's your classic sort of mechanism of how you sort of develop a sort of moral game character. You can either be bad or you can be good. Curious about the outcome of ill treatment, Wright began to slap his creature about. Now it's worth pointing out at this juncture, the creature doesn't exist. There is no creature. It is a game, a video game. This is a safe thing to do. If you want to go around slapping a duck, that's okay. Okay, just don't slap a duck. Slap a video game duck, there are no bad outcomes. He was astonished to find himself feeling really guilty about mistreating his duck or whatever it was. And even though he's obviously not a real being with real emotions, the duck didn't care. The duck doesn't exist. That kid that I hog-tie in Red Dead Redemption 2 and throw in front of a moving train doesn't care that I've killed it because it's not real. It doesn't exist. But I feel sometimes bad about murdering children in Red Dead Redemption 2. Not all the time, sometimes I feel really good about it, especially if they're annoying. I don't have a problem with that then. But sometimes I feel, this is a really strange phenomenon. I play a lot of these sort of open world games, and sometimes I do feel really bad about running down pedestrians. And so, especially if it wasn't something I wanted to do. If I'm like being chased by police or something and I have to go up on the pavement to get away from them, and I just mow down a load of pedestrians, it does make me step back and think, I feel bad about that. But, you know, like they didn't deserve to die. It's like they don't exist. There is no they. They're not real. But I still have that emotional response to them. That taps into my base emotional response, which is, you know, if I went down there now and jumped in that bus, I would not drive it over those people standing there. It kind of sounds fun, but I would feel really bad about doing that for about 20 minutes. I might get over it. We don't do this, right? So, again, who are our drivers in this room? Who's got a driving licence? We do have a few. Connor, do you get a great enjoyment out of getting in the car and then mowing down young children?
Never done it.
Never done it? Never fancied it?
No, not really.
You have to think about that. Yeah.
Second
But as a player of games like Red Dead Redemption 2, you have no problem with doing that in the game, do you?
I do like mowing down people.
Yeah, of course you do, yeah. So, but sometimes you feel like, shit, I should have done that. Yeah. It's strange, that feeling is really weird, especially when it's an unintentional action and we caused harm to someone in the game that we didn't really intend to. It's like, damn it, I don't know, I wish I hadn't done that. And I was like, why? Well, why? There's no consequences. Knock yourself out, that capacity to evoke actual feelings of guilt from a fictional experience is really unique to games. And it's not just guilt that we should focus on as an emotion here. The capacity to create happiness from that kind of interaction. If you are a psycho, you will get a great deal of happiness of just mowing people down, and good on you, because that's stopping you from doing it in everyday life. I encourage psychos to do that. So a reader or film goer may feel emotions when presented with horrific fictional acts on the page and screen, but they're not responsible. If you watch a film or read a novel or watch a television series where generally awful things happen to characters in that, you're not responsible for that action. You're not put in a position where you are complicit with doing it. Even if it's shot through the eyes of the perpetrator, you are still distanced in a particular way.
But it makes you reflect on maybe certain matters that then can make
Sure.
you feel guilty.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can reflect in that way, but I think what games do is add an immediacy to it, because it's your activity that's caused that. There's a feeling of cause and effect relationship between the suffering of someone else and what you've done. So, because games depend on active player choices, they have an additional palette of what we call social emotions, which is really, really important when we consider how we gain enjoyment out of doing things and what games actually do this. So, experts in grounded cognition argue that these techniques evoke emotion because they mirror the way our brains make sense of the world around us in everyday life. Posit that our brains compare what we sense and experience in any given moment to our past experiences, whether real or mediated, created by media, in order to come up with a set of emotional and cognitive responses that are grounded in experience. So what basically grounded cognition means is our experiences in the world are grounded in who we are as people. It's like a continuous cycle. Experience builds on top of experience all the time to build up this mountain of things that make us the complex human beings that we are. When we do things in games, we engage with that history. We're always engaging with us when we're doing things. And because of that, the emotional tenor of how we feel about things is a reflection, if you like, of that emotional history we have of ourselves. Which is why it's very often easier, I think, when you're a kid to do violent things in games. Because you have less of this. It's when you emotionally mature, it's like, and I get this often from people like my parents and my partner and stuff, is like, why are you driving around just aimlessly killing people? It's fun, isn't it? I'm like, no, it's not fun, because they're all emotionally mature than me. They can see that this is not a way that a normal human being of my age, of my experience, of my job, of should not be getting any enjoyment out of doing this. But then those are the people who fucked me up in the first place, so it's their responsibility that I get enjoyment out of choice, right? You know, that's how psychology works. We blame our parents for everything. So, what we need to understand here, again, okay, let's start adding all these elements together. We've got choice, flow, and that element of grounded cognition. That flow state, what we do in flow, relates very specifically to who we are and what we are and the emotional tenor of ourselves as people, which comes from our history of experience, basically, how we experience things. Which then answers our question, right? The reason why you don't enjoy horror games is grounded in your life experiences in particular ways. The reason I do enjoy them is grounded in my life experience, which is obviously going to be very different from yours, because we've had, you know, for one, mine is like twice the length of yours to begin with, but also we've been brought up in different environments, etc., right? And this is why your experience can be different to Connor's, etc., and everyone else in the room. So, if you like, this gives us a layer of individualization. There are choices, which could be presented to all of us in games. Flow can be kind of universal experience, but grounded cognition brings that individualization to the emotional content of things. Now, importantly, one of the key differences between games and other types of media is the concept of the avatar. And one of the reasons why we have distinct emotional responses with games is through the avatar. So avatars have been around since ancient Greek times, and basically the word avatar refers to a specific character whom a viewer or a reader of a story, they can identify with that specifically. An avatar, usually thought of as a main character in something. So if we're talking about, you know, films, for example, you usually have a key central character. That relates to the Greek term avatar. A character through which we are asked to emotionally engage with the text that we are in. You'll be familiar with it from novels. Novels are very often told from the perspective of a particular character. That character would be the avatar. That's who we're being asked to identify with in that story. So in gaming, the protagonist is known as an avatar, usually. We usually have an avatar through which to experience the game. Something like Sims, you might have men, for example. As with protagonists in film, the player learns about avatars through how they look and how they react to other characters, how they fit into the game world. And one of the things that we have in games, which is very interesting, is the idea of the NPC, right? Games aren't empty, unless they're designed that way. But usually we've got a bunch of NPCs that we actually interact with. The avatar's personal qualities and capacities also reflect in what is possible for the player to do. And this is where avatars in games and our relationship with them become really, really interesting. Because what we're asked to do when we embody an avatar in a game is to get used to the limitations of that avatar. There are some things you can do and some things you can't do. That shapes your experience of the game itself. What are the limitations on what I can do here? Those limitations are usually designed by the game designers because there are limitations in what you can do in a game itself. So they're usually shaped by the limitations of what the game is capable of. But then that creates our emotional sort of attachment to the avatar itself. Limitations here can mean appearance. To what extent can we customize or change the appearance of our avatar? Some games offer us wildly different possibilities of doing that. Some are much more limited. But also, what can the avatar do in a physical sense in the game? What are their capabilities? What are their skills? And that can be really frustrating as well. If you've got, your character gets beaten up all the time in an old-fashioned fighting game, that's not fun. Pick a different one. It's going to suck, You don't feel you do feel an emotional connection to characters like that, because I'm thinking like League of Legends stuff here. But if you play League of Legends and your character really sucks, you hate them. Because, that avatar blows, you want to go to a better avatar. Basically, what does an avatar do in a video game? Well, we move through the game world, and perform actions, using our avatar, right? So our entire movement through game worlds is dependent on avatars. And therefore, when we're controlling an avatar, we project ourselves into the character on 4 levels: visceral, cognitive, social, and fantasy level. Our relationship to the avatar is across these. So the player's prosthetic body with its specific capabilities and tendencies becomes a vehicle for action, and then we build skill and strength over time, which is reflected in this virtual body. That's the visceral element. Visceral referring to physical body itself. We have a relationship to how that avatar actually exists. If you think in terms of a game which you can occupy multiple avatars in a very short period of time, like FIFA, for example, the physical characteristics of players becomes something through which we engage with the game, right? Certain strategies, actions, and reactions are rewarded over others, and this is the cognitive level of experience with the avatar itself. I picked Borderlands in the background here. Has anyone ever played one of the Borderlands games? You're given like 3 basic choices for what character you can pick in Borderlands. You can customize from there, but you give 3 classes of player. The game is radically different in each different class of player that you play. It's literally a different game experience. Inhabiting the avatar's social persona allows the player to try out social qualities they may not normally possess, by the level of social experience. So we've got Warcraft stuff behind you. One of the great attractions of games like Warcraft, MMORPGs, is the idea that we can embody an avatar in a particular way and have social experiences with other players in the game, not as we are, not as we might be. You can be socially awkward, socially anxious in particular ways, but the avatar acts as a mask to that. The person isn't seeing you. They don't know where you are. They don't know what you do. Instead, you can occupy that avatar with its qualities, and that becomes a bridge to social contact, which removes some of the barriers to social contact that we might feel in everyday life. It doesn't just apply to social games. This also applies to any kind of game. You can have interactions in video games which you're not capable of doing in everyday life. So all of these design choices work together to allow the player to explore alternate fantasy selves through actual in-game performance, providing what we call the fantasy level of experience of the avatar. Over the course of gameplay, players extend themselves further into the motivations and the visceral, cognitive, social, and fantasy possibilities of the avatar, forging an identification grounded in observation as well as experience. It feels, when we play certain games and our character is doing really well, it feels good. We actually identify with the progress of that character through the game. This happens on these 4 levels: the visceral, the cognitive, the social, and the fantasy level. Well, the fantasy level is, if you like, we take on the character as us. Through the interactions in those 3 other levels, we actually take, that is me. I am Arthur Morgan. It's kind of weird for me because I'm a crime fighter. So it's a weird relationship with our character. But this joining of player to virtual self through avatar-based action marks a core innovation that games have brought to media, and an extremely powerful one when it comes to invoking emotions. Because what happens when you go through all of this and then your avatar dies? Anyone got this experience? I'm looking specifically because I know you've done this.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's gut punch, right?
Yeah.
It's a real solid fucking gut punch when that happens. A lot of games, I wish they'd get rid of this mechanism in games very often. I know they won't because everyone will stop playing them. But I wish in a lot of modern games, do you know it's like Spider-Man 2 now? I kind of wish that if you die in Spider-Man 2 you have to start again. Now I know no one's ever going to play the game if you have to do that, right? But it would increase the emotional punch of the game so much if, like, you play through and it's like, do you imagine you got really close to it? Imagine you get the last boss and you die and then you have to start at the beginning. You would actually mourn that gameplay and that characterization that you've been through.
But then you would stop
Well,
playing.
actually, do you know, make it even better? Do you know what, even better? No, you can't start again. You would just have to die. And you're never allowed to play the fucking game ever again. That would even be better. That's what I want to do.
A lot of games have that difficulty, I think.
Dark Souls is a classic with this. Dark Souls literally has this on like beginner level as well.
So it's called Iron Man difficulty, and a few games have it. I think Witcher 3 has it, XCOM very famously has it.
Yeah, if you go up to nightmare levels, this is, isn't it? You know,
You literally games, Minecraft Hardcore, that's a good example.
Yeah, that's a
Servers
good example.
deleted, that's it, your game's
Yeah.
done.
Which means not a lot of people actually do it. It would increase the emotional heft of the game if you go through this process of building identification and then all of a sudden told, nope. Like, damn! That would be... And then there are some games which have built that kind of gut punch into them as well, which are usually included in this list of things. Now, what's important when we consider that level of engagement with avatars is how we play. And we can then make a distinction between solo play and social play. And that distinction, I think, is very important in terms of not just how we relate to our avatar, but how games have an emotional sort of content to them. It's really important to note that solo play is not by definition a lonely experience. So any kind of digital game involves other characters. Usually, there's the odd exception to this, I think, but most games will include other characters in it, or other things that we can discern as a character and which we have interactions with. So we're always sort of embodied and immersed in a virtual world which has interactions with it, even if those interactions are limited. At least you think your action is taking place in a world populated with other things. Game designers then sort of use dynamic and reactive engagement with these characters to add to the emotional palette of the game. So as game design has gone on, and really the big change in this happens in the late 90s where we see transference, first in game storage, from cartridges to first CDs and then DVDs and now Blu-rays, where you're allowed to build much bigger games based on the storage capability of the media you're using. That allows you more opportunity to develop interactions with other characters, basically. One of the big differences between, if you like, games from the 80s and 90s and games from the 2000s onwards is the extent to which you can interact with other characters in them. Classically, old games, you think, I don't know, Super Mario 1, right? There are other characters in Super Mario 1. There are things that you jump on. You don't have a great deal of emotional sort of interaction with these things. There are other things there. It's not an empty world, but there's no emotional or interactive sort of content with the game. As we move through the 90s into the 2000s, we see the levels of interactivity with other characters develop exponentially. So, how this differs, of course, from something like a film or a television series is that in a film, those interactions are directed for us. In games, we can very often choose who we interact with, which NPCs we interact with, who we talk with, who we spend time with in the game, even if it's a solo game itself. Non-player characters can make jokes that lighten the mood, they can give you information, they can provide assistance, even sacrifice themselves. That dynamic interaction with virtual other beings can be a very important part of the emotional content of the game itself. Interactions with NPCs move players beyond parasocial feelings into consequential social experiences. A parasocial relationship is perhaps something we might get in a film, where we identify with a character and we're invested in the outcome, but we have no possibility of interacting them from our audience position. We can, shouting at the screen at Captain Marvel ain't going to make Captain Marvel do anything different. But in a video game, you can interact with characters in particular ways which changes the outcomes of what happens in that game. Now, I'm not doubting that people can have powerful parasocial relationships with things. I mean, there's millions of people around the world who think that, you know, they have some kind of personal relationship with Taylor Swift, for example. They don't. It'd be nice, but they don't. Taylor doesn't give a shit about any of those people, and I wouldn't blame her for taking that position. But people feel like they have a very strong relationship. That characterization as a parasocial interaction has been known about for a very, very long time. Really, since the birth of pop culture in the 1950s, we've been fascinated with the idea that people identify with people in popular culture in particular ways. And obviously, media creators encourage parasocial relationships because it means very strong economic outcomes. If you can develop a really strong parasocial relationship between the audience and a star, then you get great financial outcomes from it. We feel like we know these people and, you know, we follow their careers. Games do it much easier. Our parasocial relationships with characters in games, it's almost a byproduct of the game itself. So this very often comes from the way that we're encouraged to interact with NPCs, and the most famous example of that is definitely The Sims. The way that the game mechanism itself encourages us not just to develop our characters, but have interactions with these other characters in the world as well. And because Sims characters have autonomous behaviours, you know, and you get this. Do you know when you Sims and they just do things which you don't want them to do? Why do you want to do that though?
I like putting the Sims outside so I can just decorate the house for a couple hours.
With nothing random or terrible happening?
Yeah. It's like
Chicken.
It's like the DS game, like the old Sims.
Yeah.
Like you'd be like decorating your house and then so you have like the small controls and someone you like look behind you and someone would be like robbing your house and it stressed me out so much.
That's where the fun comes from. I'm going to skip over a little bit. You can go back and read that slide if you want to, guys. But it's really, the important point here is that games design interactions with NPC in particular ways in order to increase our emotional reaction to them. Now, social play, actually, the emotional content of social play is much, much easier again because we're always engaging with other people. That image of the isolated gamer is a complete myth. The majority of people who play digital games play them with other people. Since the late 1990s, online play has actually become the dominant form of interaction with video games. When humans play together, we usually playing together. Now, this game is one of my favourite games in the history of mankind. This is one of the greatest games of all time, NHL '94, the greatest sports game of all time. I am one of the best players in the world at this game. Do you know why? Because I have been playing this game for 30 fucking years non-stop. I should be pretty good at it by now. I enter tournaments online. I whip people's asses on it. I am incredibly good at it. It's the most humble brag in history. But what's interesting here is this has actually been the foundational basis of research papers, not least by me. I've actually done academic papers on this game, but also much more interesting people than me. So Mandrick and Ickren invited experienced digital gamers to bring a friend to their lab where they both played an NHL game from the NHL series, right? Each person played in two different situations, against the computer and against his or her friend, using questionnaires and physiological measures. So basically you attach a bunch of sensors on people. When you get things like increased galvanic skin response, which is a very posh way of saying sweat, and when you get muscle-related activity using EMGs, you're basically measuring levels of arousal and enjoyment. When you get an increase in galvanic skin response in a situation like that, you say people enjoy doing it this way rather than that way. Researchers tried to identify differences in how players found each condition. Not surprisingly, found that people preferred social play. We actually prefer to interact with play on the screen. And that's a scientific measure of doing it. Something deeply satisfying and bonding about overcoming a challenging mental and physical situation with someone else, especially if it requires close coordination. I think despite all the rage quits and foul language, this is why people really like Fortnite. It encourages close coordination. That's why I think actually Fortnite's really positive for kids. Because it actually encourages them to develop cooperation skills, which aren't always built into other games, but there are distinct mechanisms in Fortnite. And what I usually see, and you guys all know Will Merrin, right? Yeah. So back sort of in that horrible period after lockdown, you can kind of see people, but you couldn't. I used to go over Will's house quite a lot during then, and I used to watch his kid who was 10 at the time playing Fortnite. And he played online. He played a lot with his friends. Basically, that's all he played with. And they instinctively, generally, they all had headsets, but they didn't talk to each other about doing this stuff. Stuff they talked about was nonsense. But the stuff that they were actually doing, and which you could see on screen, was they had developed cooperative plans about how to succeed. So about like 6 of them, basically, kind of formed like a guild, I suppose. And they just did it. Building structures in particular ways that allowed them to interact with the game space in the most optimal sense possible. Not launching attacks on people until they were absolutely ready. But they didn't have to say when they were ready. They knew, because they'd been playing together as a team for so long. They knew their tactics, they knew what they were trying to achieve, they knew how they were trying to achieve it. They even had specific places on the island. They didn't have just one in case somebody else got there first, but they'd have several different places on the island which somebody got there, okay, right, we go here, we go here. But they weren't talking about it. They'd all coordinated in this way. You thought, do you know what? You could have makings of a really nice little football team there. Because they know exactly what to do when each another in, in terms of space and that sort of thing. And if they weren't all there, they didn't play, because it wasn't enjoyable. To play without one member of the team meant it was less enjoyable than in other ways. And this, I think, is the core to social play. It's that idea of cooperation and being able to do things in that way. So taking on a virtual self in a multiplayer setting brings the gaze and expectations of other players to bear on a player's adopted in-game identity. This, if you like, relates to Goffman. You know, most of you would have done social media cultures, and Irving Goffman, the Canadian sociologist, has said we adopt a series of roles. Well, when we're in social play of this kind, what we're doing is an extension of what we do in everyday life with the adoption of roles, basically. We are already familiar that we inhabit and form myriad social roles, for example, and we know what Goffman says about that. Our game avatars allow us to peel away some of those layers and adopt alternative identities as well from our everyday life. Which, one thing I probably didn't make clear last year was that's actually a really positive thing and something we enjoy doing as human beings, is to take on different roles and act in different roles in that way. What we should also think about, I know we're out of time, but this is actually quite an important point. When we talk about emotion, we should always think about the interface. How easy is it for us actually to play? And what do we get from it? Games, unlike other forms of media again, so making the differential again, are all about touch. In a way that experiencing other media is not. Now, we touch other media. When we're reading a book, we're literally holding it in our hands. But if you press the page, it don't do anything. Do you know? It's a different kind of touch altogether. Because we're always in contact with the game through touch, that gives game worlds things which other media worlds don't, like a feeling of weight, for example. You've been playing GTA 4, right, Alice?
Yeah.
GTA 4?
Yeah, I think it's 4.
Or probably 5.
Maybe, I don't know.
Does it feel, there's something really interesting about those GTA games. They feel heavy. I don't know if anyone who's ever played them can agree with me on this.
What's
If you
that?
don't,
Yeah, Divine Heavy.
It literally, what I mean by it is that when things happen in that game, there's like a weight to them. It's like if you crash a car, it feels
Yeah.
like you've crashed a car.
Absolutely.
If you fall and your character like bump and rolls, it feels like that.
I agree.
In a way that some other games don't. This is a function of the now I think that all comes from the fact that I played it on PlayStation. And when you do things like that, you get that feedback. And that adds a sense of weight to the things. If I was to play it on like a handheld, I know like playing GTA 5 on a handheld, we can't really do that, but you know, if I had a Steam Deck, for example, and I was doing that, which I think you could just about manage, I don't think it would feel the same. Because you don't get that off of Steam Deck, you know, you don't get that haptic feedback with it, which gives it a sense of weight. That all comes from how the touch is programmed, and how a sense touch are programmed. Now, some players in FIFA, you could say, have got a heavy shot. You know what I mean by that? You go like players in FIFA and you think they've got a real hammer of a shot on them, as opposed to other players.
I don't know, I haven't been in ages.
You go. You might be out of touch with it, but if you get back into it, you remember like, oh, you can hit the ball in. It's like, no, we can't. But it's the way that the touch and the interface is designed that makes you feel that way. Now, what's important here is for us to recognise, and this is something again which you're probably going to draw on for your videos, right? Playing digital video games is a multi-sensory activity. It's not just as simple as sitting and watching something. So we perceive things through touch, through sight, through through sound, etc. Researchers have called this haptic intimacy. The idea that we have haptic interfaces for games brings a closeness and a body familiarity with things. It gives us a sense of knowledge, not embodied in our brains, but also in our hands, how we do things. There's a sense of familiarity. Now, Con, if you did go back to FIFA, it wouldn't take you very long to get back to the level you were. Do you know why? It's all in your hands. You've played it so much, you get right back into it straight away, because all that knowledge is embodied in a way. It's a knowledge of others and ourselves in the body. It's what's called proprioception, to use the term from Jason Farman. And what we should take from this in terms of emotional video games, this is a very old argument from David Sudnow. He was writing about arcade games from the 1970s, but it's an argument nevertheless that works. It is an augmented I that plays video games. Me, I am augmented when I play them. The body interacts, they're stories for eye, ear and muscle, and our body, an embodied sense of perception constitutes the phenomena of video game play. We press without looking, we do things without realising. We are in control, but we're not in control, much like when we drive a car. So that bodily incorporation is extremely important. It's a kinesthetic experience playing games. And kinesthetic experiences are emotional experiences. They're embodied experience, and embodiment always involves a certain emotional content to it. This is why games have emotions in the way that other things don't. Right, I know I've overrun as always, and I know a lot of you have got to go to a lecture, so I will see you next week. However, from this point onwards, I am open to all feedback that you need for your assignments, okay? So please, as soon as you need something, that includes if you want to set up meetings or so on, please get in touch.